All right, here we go. So today I was going to talk about the PBA and the show they had yesterday. I watched the whole show, of course, and while I'm watching it, I'm kind of thinking back in my mind. It's like, well, do I have anything clever to say about this show? And maybe I do, maybe I don't. Sometimes I kind of let it percolate, for a couple of hours. And last night I was all ready, to record a video, regarding the show and everything. And they didn't have it. The CW didn't have it posted. Usually it's a couple of hours after they air the show, and they didn't have it on last night. So I thought I'd just wait till today to make this video. And so during that time, I kind of was reviewing some social media, people talking about the show, and there's a lot of good points about it. And one thing I noticed, kind of the common theme was personalities and how the players weren't very exciting, the matches weren't very exciting, and so on and so forth. A lot of criticism, about Austin Grammer and his lack of emotion. I don't know. My opinion is it, I don't have much of an opinion actually. Everyone's kind of got their own. But before I, wanted to continue on, I just want to give a little, little moment of, reflection on a buddy of mine that recently passed away, Jim Murtishaw. I mean, we weren't too close, but he, he's one of those players out of SoCal that, as I was coming up, I was going against them in some of these local events, obviously regionals. Um, and out here in the West Coast, we've got, or we used to have, what was called the Pacific Coast Bowlers, and that was an organization very similar to your regional, tournaments or your regional formats, or uh, basically that level of competition and intensity. And one thing that the PCBs did is that it allowed the local people that were really good, that basically should have been professional, but they didn't want to go professional for whatever reason. Sometimes these professional amateurs, as we call them, they didn't want to have a card. But anyways, let me get back to Jim. And Jim was one of those guys that wasn't very talkative, but he was, once you, got to know him and you talked to him, especially about bowling or just, whatever the conversation is at the time, he was always very, very good to me. And I appreciated, any ounce of wisdom that he could pass down to me. I remember, I don't really have any great stories about, about Jim and I doing anything fantastic or anything like that, but he was good to me, and I appreciated it. And very sad to hear of his passing. Um, so anyway, so what I did is I pulled up a video of my first time seeing him, and this is kind of my little appreciation, to Mertz. But before I start this video, there's something to be said, about, creating excitement while on TV. And it just happened to be, just pure coincidence that I pulled up this video, and Mertz is bowling against Weber, for the title. This is the 87 Firestone. And, Petey went up the ladder, and, he gave Mertz the business, and this was the first shot out. So anyways, bit of a tribute, bit of it plays into, the criticisms of what we're seeing on the tour right now. So let me pull this up. I'm gonna get my glasses on, of course.
Thrill we've ever had in professional bowling, the 300 in McCordick, not even eligible for the Firestone Tournament Champions, and I guess second only to that 300.
So here you can see Petey's getting up. He's starting on the left lane. Just as usual.
Game would be a
You're going to see some excitement here.
Victory in the Firestone. It's left down to just two men. Pete Weber, whose father has finished second twice in this tournament, and Jim Murtishaw, who took the lead in the last 8 games last night. Let's see what happens.
So you can see Petey getting pretty excited. I mean, that's just the first strike, first ball. I mean, yeah, he is. He's already got 3 games under him, so he feels pretty comfortable, obviously. And he's into it. I mean, this is it's actually his first of his major titles, and I think this was actually number 10 title overall for him. But anyways, here's a little shot of my buddy Mert.
Is unbeatable when the adrenaline gets flowing. He starts out again with that powerful strike, Bo.
Very much so, Chris. And here's a methodical young man who has gone about his business very quietly. He's bowling as well as anybody I've seen in the tournament. In the qualifying, I had the pleasure of following this man on my qualifying pair. He just never made a mistake all week long.
Look at that. The current Southern California bowl.
Little snap 10 right there, so anyways.
Of the year from Vista. His
His
4th television appearance, and as we indicated, his first Firestone after a victory in Venice.
Chris, a 4.5-step delivery, just an ideal textbook style. Just tremendous. He's gained a lot of confidence with that victory in Venice, and as you said, Southern California Bowler of the Year, and that doesn't come lightly. Glenn Allison, Barry Asher, just to mention a few who have won that title before. Some great champions before him now with 9 frames.
So, that's my buddy Mertz there. Rest in peace, brother. I'll see you. I'll see you down the road sometime. Maybe we'll go do some bowling together when we're both up in heaven. Well, let me see. Let me get this changed over here. So anyways, let me see if I can share this image file here. This is one of my first times coming across Mertz here. It's amazing how timing works out. Someone posted this on Facebook, and of course I saved it. So I'm not too sure if you can see this. But anyways, this was actually my first, I don't know if it was I think this was my first PC event. It was definitely the first time I made finals. It was very similar to the regional format. The only difference, 2 main differences were regionals, you had 10 games of qualifying. PCs, you had 6 games of qualifying. And the other difference is the PCs, they just relied on the that house, that bowling center to put out whatever whatever pattern they wanted to put out. This was so that Friendly Hills Lanes, and got a little quick story about. Well, you can see here, this is the tournament that Mertz won, appropriate, and this was my first I definitely know it was my first finals. I don't know if it was my first PC. It may have been, but anyways. Yeah, I was dead last, 16. It was definitely an experience and something that I mean I'll never forget, just because it was my first time in a big boy tournament, and bowled well enough into the finals, and then I wouldn't say the wheels fell off, but it was definitely an experience that I've never had before. I grew up in a bowling center that traditionally had plenty of oil. Yeah, we did go through the short oil era. I grew up in a bowling center that had plenty of oil, and this place was just bone dry. But anyways, I'm gonna move on here. But that's my little tribute to Mertz. Rest in peace, brother. So we'll bring this up here, and we'll get to the pregame show here, and we'll watch this. There's been various criticisms, to Kyle and the other guy.
It is the 8th event of the year.
And over the years, announcers have always had. It doesn't matter what it is. I used to watch the Major League Baseball, or I watch Dodgers a lot, and over the years, of course, Vin Scully, legendary, and just on through the years, Rick Monday and Ross Perot, and anyway, so my point about announcers, they're always going to be criticized. It doesn't matter what it is, someone's going to have a problem with them. So, anyways, we'll go through this and kind of see, what do I have to say about it? Am I going to be critical? Am I going to be one of those guys that just complains about everything or complains about half the stuff? We'll see.
It's the Surfside New York Classic. And welcome to the pregame here in Rochester. Alongside Kyle Sherman, Rick Allen with you. Kyle, another good event. We're getting closer to having to find a substitute for you on this TV.
Yeah, so here's Rick and Kyle. They've been doing the show. I think this is their 6th one or 7th one now. And, to me, I think they're doing a good job. I really do. I don't have anything to really complain about. I'm not an announcer myself, so I can't really pick apart what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong. Sometimes, Rick may get mix up his terms a little bit here and there, but all in all, I think as far as what his role is, in the booth, I think he's doing a good job. Recently they had Belmo on, and I thought Belmo was a nice little addition to add more insight into to that event. And I think later on you're going to see Barnes up, or at least during the show. And I think Chris did a really good job adding more insight into what's happening on tour and just bowling in general. So overall, I think they're doing pretty well. I think CW is doing pretty well with Rick and Kyle.
Gig. How did it feel out there on the lanes?
It was good, and I hope we run into that problem. But if it felt good to be in the hunt again. Got off to a really good start in qualifying, and then we got into match play. Bowled Nate Garcia. Was fortunate enough to kind of.
Yeah, Kyle's been turning it on the past couple of weeks. My opinion again, because I'm making the video, so it's gonna be my opinion. I thought that I could watch on some of the various not streams, but on the various videos that that the guys make, Brad and Kyle make, and some of the other stuff. Watching Kyle bowl the first couple of weeks, I kind of had the opinion that he was walking away from it a little bit. You can even see him coming back after throwing a ball, and he kind of make that little motion, like he chicken winged it, and it was like, yeah, you're walking away from it. That's usually the result. You walk away from it, your elbow has a tendency to get on the outside of the ball. And honestly, the past couple of weeks, when they would have the videos, it looks like his game's been a little bit tighter, and he hasn't really been walking away from it. But that's just me. It's my opinion. And if you don't like it, well, tough. Anyway, so we'll continue on with what Kyle has to say about his performance.
Grind out what I thought was a pretty tough pair for both of us. Scores were a little lower scoring in that match play round. And then, unfortunately, I ran into this guy named Chris Vi the next round, who we'll see later today. That you'll see why he was.
Yeah, Vi's been bowling pretty well, and he's been bowling really well, and wouldn't surprise anybody if he pops off a title here sometime soon.
Tough opponent to beat.
He's been a little television appearance. Wanting to see that included that title match.
Here, let me get to some of the players here. Let's see what EJ has to say.
5 of the 8, but that one has eluded you as far as the win. What's been different this year?
I've had a couple of events where I made some bad decisions a couple of times where I bowled well and just got beat. And that's the way sports goes sometimes. And it's just one of those things. I'm always playing the numbers game. If I get there enough times, eventually something will go right and I'll end up winning. But I have to continue to bowl well and continue to put myself in those positions to have opportunities to win championships.
Yeah, EJ, I think we're all confident you're going to get one this year. Let's bring it to this week. We bowled on the bear pattern. A pattern you typically bowl really, really well on. You were just saying you haven't finished outside the top 3 since.
It's been almost 10 years, I think.
I like what they're doing here with the pregame show. again, this brings more insight into what's happening behind the scenes. I prefer this a lot more than, talking, what kind of bowling ball are they throwing, or what kind of pattern are they on, or what the layout is, or, just nonsense like that. Let's talk to the players. Let the players, give their insight into what's happening. I know that there's a tendency out there, within, some of the industry people, is to, we got to educate the viewers. No, you don't. You need to entertain the viewers. There's a difference. You don't need to educate them. Viewers don't care, about patterns and bowling balls. Maybe the hardcore viewer does, but then, if it's really a hardcore viewer that's, maybe on the verge of, bowling professional events, or is competing on a regular basis, most of those guys already know. They already have access to, the latest and greatest, whatever ball it is, or cover stock, or layout, or patterns, and how to break down a pattern. Those hardcore people, they have all the information. And, the people that are casual, they don't care about what ball it is. They want to, they want to be entertained by, by the bowlers. They're not there to be entertained by, hey, this is an 8-pound dynamic and balanced, weight block, or whatever asymmetrical weight block. Casual viewer, that doesn't mean anything to them. So stop with that. Hey, we got to educate the viewer. Stop with that.
Since I finished, I'll say the top 3 on this pattern. And it was definitely, the pattern was different than we've ever seen for bear. I think it was the first time it's ever been less than 40 feet.
So it's a little bit of insight, that they're talking about the pattern and how it plays differently at, at different events. And, it wasn't just, that's what EJ is talking about. It's like, hey, familiar with this pattern, but it was a little bit different. And EJ just didn't have a very good, I'm not too sure where he finished. I'm sure he was up there, in the mix. But anyways, I don't remember actually if he, anyways, I don't remember, but it was different, played different than other. But I'm going to get through this. Let me see if I can get to the next. I think they started getting some of the players in. It looks like they're kind of bringing into the social network, the social side of bowling. And this is something that I really enjoy, and I really like that's I don't know if you want to call it grassroots, but it kind of is. This isn't something that the PBA told the players, hey, you guys need to go out there, get a camera, and videotape yourself. Brad and Kyle, and the house, and I know some of the other players are doing some stuff. I think Ethan Fiore has been posting videos, but not really, the same style of what Brad and Kyle are doing. I think Kyle Troop is doing some stuff. I see some stuff from Belmo. Yeah, Belmo's doing his own thing. Where he'll record, before that round or block or whatever. But I really like what they're doing. To me, this is the engagement that that I think that we've missed. Because ESPN isn't going to come out and do anything. Yeah, it was nice for HBO to do their documentary on on bowling. That was nice, or is nice. However you want to look at it. Yeah, so I really like it.
What sort of question is that? Naming a kid, but I can only use a term from bowling. Oh, got her. Lily. Dust. Ooh, bird dog. Pin. I feel like Brooklyn's the easy answer.
I thought this was kind of funny. I thought it was pretty cool. It's kind of funny. Name a kid after a bowling term. Bird dog. I just don't think that's going to play too well. I don't think the missus is going to like that. But Brooklyn was a good one. We've seen that. So, anyways,
They're right. I feel like Lane makes sense. I hear Lane's like a normal name.
Lane. There's Lane Staley, but kind of spelled it a little bit differently. Yeah.
God dang, that's a good one. That's hard. Easy slide. Bird dog.
Probably my girlfriend's name, Brooklyn.
Messenger. Arrow. Hey, there we go. There's a good one.
Yeah. So anyways, I thought that was pretty good. You know, and this is pregame. You know, this is not something that's broadcast on, you know, on CW or whatever. You know, they just put this up on YouTube, and I really like what they're doing. They're integrating YouTube with, you know, with their network coverage. Overall, I like what CW is doing. You know, to me, I think they're showing bowling in the best possible light. You know, all of us get frustrated with with the stupid jokes, you know, about balls or whatever. You know, that stuff just, you know, it's just lame and it's tired, and it's actually a lazy joke. You know, when you're talking about heavy balls or some stupid stuff like that. But overall, I like what CW is doing, and I think here Taryn Hatcher, I think she's doing a really good job. Anyways, so
I also would have gone with Brooklyn there, but that's besides the fact. The upcoming finale of the HBO series Born to Bowl features a very special episode about the very special friendship between.
So they're kind of hitting all cylinders here, at least in my opinion. You know, they're you know, they've got this HBO, you know, docu-series, and you know, they're hitting all the social networks, and you know, the before, during, and after. You know, I think they're doing a good job. You know, you guys want to complain about Kyle or Rick, you know, whatever. You know, to me, it's just, it doesn't matter who's in that booth. You're going to complain about it. If you're one of those guys, you know, that wants to complain, you're going to find something. Probably find something to complain about Taryn, and she's doing a really good job.
Kyle Troop and Jesper Svensson. Let's take a sneak peek at that episode.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that. You know, I'm not really interested in a bromance. You know, I mean, yeah, you know, I think that many of us have had, you know, close friends, you know, in the industry, because, you know, I mean, when you're bowling and you're traveling together, you know, you spend a lot of time in a car in a hotel, and you know, getting some food, you know, working out your bowling balls, you know, or you're talking about strategy as you're going into, you know, into the, you know, beginning of the tournament, you know, or you talk about your practice session, you know, it's like, yeah, I'm going to surface this ball, I'm going to do this. Like, yeah, you start to have, you know, friends, you know, that you care about and you want to see do well. But on the other side of it, there's definitely professional envy that gets involved, and to me, it's a tough line, you know, to toe. That it's like, yeah, you want to root for your buddy, but then, you know, if you're the one on the sidelines, you know, which was me, you know, a lot of the times, you know, if you're one of those on the sidelines and you see your buddy up there, you know, performing, you know, a lot better than you are, yeah, there's going to be some envy. And anyways, you know, my point is, you know, a lot of these guys, they become close, and, you know, I think they kind of played into it a little too much, you know, basically had a whole episode on it, or majority of an episode. And I don't know, you know, maybe this is just old man get off my lawn complaining.
Benson in the ice, number 6. You know, I own him if I didn't bowl. I don't know where my life would be without bowling, but I wouldn't have any of these amazing people in it.
I don't know if I'd be crying if my buddy won. You know, I you know, had a couple of friends that, you know, that won. You know, I had a buddy that made a couple of shows. I don't think I got to the point of crying. Was I happy for them? Yeah, absolutely. You know, I remember when, you know, Robert won the U.S. Open, and Tennille won, you know, the women's U.S. Open, you know, same year. And, you know, it's special, and it's great that, hey, I got to bowl with these people. I got to know these people. I don't think I'm going to be crying for any of my buddies winning a tournament. You know, so sorry to any of my buddies out there, but yeah, the tears aren't coming for that one.
That's for sure.
Tournament of Champions turns into the Tournament of Buddies. It seems like that's tomorrow night. All right, on the other side.
Let's talk a little bit about the format, how both of you guys had good weeks, obviously.
So, yeah, a little resurgence from Chris Barnes. I think he's about a year older than me, and so I definitely recognize the physical challenges of being being that age and trying to compete. I tried to get through a 6-gamer this past weekend, and I didn't perform too well, and luckily I it was a team with the trios, and I got held up by one of my buddies, and we were able to snap off a win. But anyways, yeah, that age, trying to compete at this level, to me the hardest thing is repeating shots. That's what I notice now at this age. Competing is, I'll be up there on the approach, and everything's, like my body's all warmed up. I know where I'm playing, exactly what I need to do to execute, and I'll get up there halfway through my approach, and and things just go all to hell. Just it's you can talk about muscle memory, but there's something there with age and muscle. It isn't necessarily muscle memory. It's just almost like you have like a little glitch. It's like this little sudden, subtle glitch where maybe your step doesn't go up far enough, or it's like a little fast, or it's a little slow, and then all of a sudden you get to you get to your drive step, and you're all out of position, and you're doing everything you can to try and mitigate that whatever. And anyway, so I don't know how I went down that rabbit hole, but yeah, it's nice to see Chris get up there and compete. I think that for him to compete at this age, the pattern's got to be more difficult. Not this 230 average ridiculous stuff that they're doing. Even this tournament was had some strikes. I think that if they were able to manage the scoring pace down, like minus another mark, and where 220 would be, whatever we're making, whatever that format is, top 24. If the scoring pace was in that range, I think that Chris would be doing better. Outside of the whole one-handed, two-handed discussion. It's just that it's tough. It's tough to repeat at this age, and it isn't necessarily a thing of are you good or not anymore. It's just the subtleties of being able to repeat. That's just what it is.
Qualifying went well. You made it into the bracket play. So tell me a little bit about this pattern for you and how it worked out and how it didn't work out.
Well, the Bear pattern did play much tougher than what we've seen in recent weeks. It was lower scoring, especially the first day. Guys made some adjustments. The scores went way up on day 2, and then through match play, you saw the best come out. And so the matches, it was really pair to pair, though, on how guys broke them down. Some matches got pretty high scoring. Some of them got really hard. And it was eye of the beholder for sure where you were at.
Yeah, we bowled next to each other in the matches, and I thought those played harder than they did the entire week.
Yeah, my strategy, I bowled against 18-year-old Ethan Krause, and he didn't have a lot of experience. His scores were low on the fresh. I thought, well, I'm not going to help him. It turned out to be a master class in poor strategy, and he just destroyed me early, and I had to actually get him out of his urethane-ish ball. Then I tried to make a little run and just put myself in a bad position, so a bad beat into my tournament.
With that, though, being said, are you seeing a youth movement? And I want to talk a little bit about Ryan, your son. He's a part of this youth movement, came awful close a week ago.
I tell you, I think Rick is really good in this role. He's knowledgeable, knows the questions, and knows, not just one layer down. He knows a couple layers down and knows where, what he wants to ask, and the questions are, they really provide some insight into, what's happening on tour. And I think this is important, and I think it's good. I think it's good for bowling.
But are you seeing a youth movement right now in the PBA?
Yeah, I think every 8 to 10 years ago, you see a different generation start to poke through, and these guys, the two-handed game is becoming very prevalent. These guys this whole group has grown up watching Belmo and has thrown it this way since the inception, and so they're ready to go. They have decades of experience now, or a decade of competitive experience, and they seem more ready than ever to take on the best in the world.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, they just have so much power coming out. And it seems like, I don't know if it's access to knowledge, but these kids are coming out with so much power and so much knowledge that they just come right into the tour and they're ready to go.
Yeah, I think coaching in the college, and they're using it to their advantage.
It almost speaks to the point I had earlier, about knowledge and education. If you're a hardcore bowler, you don't need some once a week TV show, to tell you about ball motion or what kind of ball or what kind of core. If you're a hardcore bowler, you're getting that information, whether you're actively going out there and drilling balls or hanging out at a pro shop or whatever it is. You don't need, a once a week TV show to tell you how to drill a bowling ball.
Okay, so we're talking about a youth movement. You're actually trying to utilize that youth movement next week
100%.
because you're going to bowl with your son.
Oh, they're talking about him. He's going to team up with his son Ryan in a doubles tournament, so which is cool. I hope they do well, and I think it'll be a nice story if they were able to find a win. I can almost write the criticisms, from all those negative people in our industry about those that don't like Chris and for whatever reason. Imagine if Chris and Ryan pull off a win, and the criticism is going to be, oh, Ryan needed his dad to carry him and carry him over to finally win his first event, whatever. It's going to be nonstop, and that's the frustrating part, about, I wouldn't say our industry. I'm sure there's a lot of it in other sports, whether it's, whatever, it could be, baseball, or, it could be, motorsports as far as NASCAR. And, certainly there's been father-son, duos out there, that have, competed. And anyways, I just, I get so tired of the criticisms of, especially Chris. He's been nothing but good to the sport, and I think that what he's done, for the sport is probably greater than any other top bowler that we've had in our industry. Earl Anthony, Mark Roth, they were pretty much in and out of the sport. They got in, they hit it hard, and then it was kind of like that they were, not to be seen again, for whatever reason. And that's not a criticism of them, but when you take, the greats that we have, and Chris Barnes is definitely one of those. And what he has done, he's, raised his son to, to be competing at a high level. And, and if you have a problem with that, then you need to look in the mirror.
In doubles, when we go to Portland, Maine, how are you looking forward to that?
100%. This is the highlight of my season. The last personal goal is the Masters. That didn't turn out so well, but last ride, as it said, I gave him every chance to go ahead and go with Fonta, one of his best friends on tour.
Right.
And he's a good kid, and he's taking pity on the old man. And so last ride, and so I'm doing all I can. The last couple of weeks have been much better.
Anyways, the point of this video is just more about the pregame show, not necessarily the details in. So I'm gonna get through some of this here and see where the next. I think they had another interview here. So let's see.
Thank you very much, Rick. All right, Chris, you come into this one, the 5 seed, coming off of another show in your hometown.
So this is Taryn doing, on the lanes interview with Chris Vi, and again, I think Taryn's doing a good job here, and Chris is bowling really well, and hopefully he'll find one.
last week. What has this week been like for you, getting back out on the road and going back to back when it comes to shows?
Yeah, it's felt good. I've tried to keep the process very similar, a little bit different, going from kind of the hometown favorite to having quite the crowd cheering actually for Kyle when we were bowling match play together. So a little different vibe this week, but just kind of stayed within myself and try to make the best shots possible.
Back-to-back shows says something about what you're doing out there lately. What do you like about the way you're bowling right now?
Yeah, I just feel like I'm physically sound, bowling well, but I'm also like making just smart decisions, and I'm being aggressive and just full.
I think Chris copied me. Hold on here. I'm going to pause this video and I'm going to go find a little special video clip. I had to find the video, so and get it queued up. And it's my first time with this whole recording stuff, and so I'm learning as I go. So, anyways, let's listen to what Chris Via has to say.
Stayed within myself and try to make the best shots possible.
You hear that? He was like, "Hey, I got to stay within myself." I think I heard someone else say that a while back.
Crowd cheering actually for Kyle when we were bowling match play together. So a little different vibe this week, but just kind of stayed within myself and try to make the best shots.
Let's see where we heard that first.
We're using today to win today's match is stay within myself and just play.
Yeah, look at that. I was a man before his time. Anyways, I thought it was kind of interesting when I heard Vi say that, and I was like, I think I heard that somewhere else. Anyways, it worked out the same for both of us. We didn't win, but his career was a lot better than mine. So, anyways, I'll get rid of this.
It's possible.
Back-to-back shows says something about what you're doing out there lately. What do you like about the way you're bowling?
Anyways, I like what Taryn's doing. I like how she's handling the players and doing the interviews and asking good questions, and overall I like it. Even though KP Kimberly Pressler was really good, and I thought she did a really excellent job. I think Taryn is equally doing a great job. So.
Right now?
Yeah, I just feel like I'm physically sound, bowling well, just processing
a new face. Thank you for the time.
Ended up make
always TV as much, so it's just really good.
Was very sick
tournament. Yeah. Then Andy's struggling with some
pregame show. I like what they're doing. It's just something that we've never had. We've had little snippets, kind of similar to what you heard. I mean, that was the going format. It was like during the telecast, you take 5 seconds, 10-second little snippet of talking to a player, and that's all you got. But this is a lot more in depth, and I like what they're doing.
Other off the lanes issues from previous years, so it just seemed like he couldn't quite.
Rick was mentioning it earlier. The guys were talking about it. You've had a little bit of
Prather, he's going to be providing a little insight, but. Anyways, the purpose of the video that I'm running here right now is just kind of talk about the pregame.
A rough road health-wise so far this season, but what do you like about where you are right now and how things have come together this week?
Yeah, I'm feeling awesome. Confidence level is really high. I've been confident all season. I just haven't been able to put it together to put it onto TV and show you guys what I've been working on.
What are you hoping to show people about, hey, through sickness and having to miss time, this is actually what I've got?
Yeah, I've battled injury, I've battled sickness, and just trying to show everybody that, even though you're not having the best year, you can still fight through it all and, make something happen, make it seem pretty cool.
I think Kyle alluded to this, but it's been a little bit of a slugfest for you off the lanes so far this year. How are you doing mentally, knowing that you've had to kind of take a different route to get to this show here today?
Yeah, it's a lot easier when you have
the only thing they should have done here with these lane side interviews is maybe do a 2-camera shot where they they should have had another camera off to the side, off to whatever the left side, and that way as Taryn is asking her questions, you can kind of switch to that view and kind of see her speak. because right now we just see the side of her head talking. Anyways, but that's my little critique on my limited knowledge as far as producing anything TV, or not limited. I don't know anything about TV.
A good support system. So guys like Kyle, Brad, Ronnie, Andrew, just having my back and being there every step of the way, showing me kind of, how to hold myself off the lanes and show some confidence even when I'm not really feeling it.
Well, listen, not only do we wish you luck and thank you for the time, but also we're going to make sure he gets some immunity boosters and he's able to stay healthy.
But he does get the win. Let's hear from him. He's standing by with Terrence.
All right, so the last
little interview with Patrick Dombrowski.
Won the U.S. Open and was getting that green jacket. What has it been like for you since? How nice is it to be back in a show again and with the possibility for another win here?
Oh, it just feels really good right now. If I win today, tomorrow, it'd be Player of the Year race. It'd feel extra special.
How has your mentality been since you got that green jacket, you got that big title? I know that was something we talked about before you won that one, that you wanted a title. Now it's under your belt, kind of that monkey off your back, that weight off your shoulders.
Yeah. Right now, it's my arms feeling loose. My swing feels great, and just got to stay on top of the lanes and see the transition, how they play.
I hate to bring this up, but we were talking over there a little bit about the fact 21 and a 23-year-old in this field. How does it feel to be the elder statesman with what feel like a couple of kids in this one?
Hey, we'll see how they go under pressure and go from there.
Well, we know how Patrick does under pressure, under some of the brightest lights in this sport. So we'll see if you can do in this one as well. Thank you for the time. Good luck.
Thank you,
guys.
Yeah. So another solid lane side interview. Again, I have no complaints. So here's when Austin Grammer comes up.
You're one win away from a title. How are you feeling right now?
Feeling excited. I'm ready to bowl. I'm ready to get out there and see what I can do.
All right.
Did you the 1 seed? How is that sinking in? I mean, you're not the 5, you're not the 4. You led this tournament as the 1 seed. Is there any extra pressure that goes with being the 1 seed?
Yes and no. I think it's good because I get to, the worst I can do is second, and I only have to win 1 match. Just unfortunately hasn't been too good for the 1 seeds lately, so maybe I can change that around.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this before the show started. Many times the 1 seed is it's not really doesn't really have much advantage. I thought this time around it was going to be better because it seemed like the scoring was a little bit lower, and I was thinking that they would have good 6 to you could probably say maybe 10 games before you even get to the final match. Obviously got the 6 games of the 3 matches. However, you got all the bowlers, or whatever it is. You got the 3 other bowlers that are waiting. Well, they're allowed to throw some warm up shots on the TV pair. So you add all that up, and there's a good 8-9 games on that pattern, and they're all right-handed, and I thought that the final match was going to be something to watch, and not for any particular reason. It was just a thought that was in my head, before the show came up. Thinking about because I did watch this pregame interview and he was talking about it, and then so I really kind of broke it down in my head. I was like, well, what's he going to be encountering? What pretty much what happened. Was a little bit in the back of my head is like, well, the previous guys are going to break him down. They're going to create a little shim there, and that there could be something, not 300 games special, but I thought that, Austin going up that he was, he wasn't going to be at like some huge disadvantage, because I didn't think they'd be as bad as like what we saw when Kent and Boog were bowling against each other. That was different. That was just a different thing going on. I really don't remember all the particulars about that. I think that was a case of, if I remember correctly, all of their qualifying and match play was done in a different part of the bowling center, and then when they were on the TV finals for the Masters, they were just on a pair of lanes that they didn't bowl on. So, I think that's what kind of led to them not reading the transitions. Maybe, again, we're talking about the Masters here and about transition and about the one seed. I thought the Masters was just a unique situation where things just kind of got caught up, and both of them, between Kent and Boog, their moves just weren't working for that moment on that pair of lanes, and that's just why we saw such the low scores. But anyways, I didn't really think that Austin was going to be nervous. I've seen him bowl in some of the junior events. I think it was junior gold or something like that. And he seemed to be always composed and like things didn't get out of hand for him. Again, he just had that sense of composure. And we'll talk about this in another video about excitement and whatever. I know that there's he's probably received a lot of criticism for how he responded, winning his first title and so on, and pretty much and it was over once he threw that ninth strike. It was mathematically it was over. It's like, before his ninth frame, mathematically, he could have opened twice and given Prather an opportunity. I think that's how the numbers were working. But anyways, we'll get into that another time.
Yeah, you can change that for sure.
You definitely can change that. We want to change that statistic and see if we can get another one seed to get a win. You have a great story, and we're going to tell it during the broadcast here just in a few minutes. But you have had a friend, a former teammate, that has been watching on Bowl TV.
This is kind of interesting. I'm going to get into this a little bit. Just, I didn't really think I was going to talk about this, but, he had a friend of his watching him on Bowl TV and offering some advice, probably lane play and, ball selection and strategy and all that. And, when you have, friends that you bowled with a lot, you kind of recognize, their tendencies, back when, my 1 year on tour, I toured with my buddy, Billy Myers Jr. And, even though he's left-handed and there's not much advice I can really give him on that side, but anyways, talking about, friends that watch each other bowl for so many, for such a long time and so many games and so many environments, whether it's qualifying or match play or step ladder, whatever it is. A quick little story for you. I was bowling league with Billy, and whenever we bowled together, we always rotated, our first, second, third, fourth, because it was a 4-man league, and so there's 4 or 5 rounds in this league, and we would always rotate, just to kind of keep the lineup fresh and kind of maybe give some guys a little bit of a break, put them in the 2-hole or 3-hole or something like that. To me, the most important, in a 4-man league are the 1 and 4 hole. Anyway, so it was late in the season, and Billy was in the 4 hole, and we need to win a match to win the round, and we happen to be on a pretty tough pattern. I really don't remember the logistics of timing and all that, but I remember we needed a hit. I think it was probably, actually, I know the pattern. It wasn't late in the season. It was our second round, and our second round was nasty. I mean, it was something like 22 feet or something like that, and it was fresh back ends, very little oil. I mean, guys were throwing plastic and booming the gutter, and it wasn't like booming the gutter, like where you're starting the ball at 12, because if you try to start the ball at 12, the ball would but the ball would hook in your hand. That's just how the pattern was. So our second round was extremely dry, extremely short, and so we had to play out. But there was enough volume up front to where when you played out, you could push the oil down. But that wasn't always guaranteed. Depending on especially when you compare left hand, right hand. And I think there was maybe one extra lefty on our pair at that time. So, anyways, kind of back to the story of friends watching each other bowl. We were, getting into that last game. We need to win the last point to win the round. And we get to that 10th frame. I don't remember what the other guys did or what I did or whatever, but Billy needs two. He needs two strikes to lock this up, for us to win. And I don't remember if it was to lock the other guy out or if it was just outright to win. And because a lot of times marks are are very good in that pattern. Getting marks is king. It's a very difficult pattern. He goes up, throws his first shot, and he goes Brooklyn. And it was kind of like, all right, well, on this difficult pattern, all you can really do is kind of come back and and try and make a good shot. And and this is kind of one of those times. It's a weird thing that happened. And I'm obviously all of us are back, and Billy's on the approach, and he needs this one hit. He needs a 4-step. So basically he starts with his left foot and he starts the ball at the same time. He gets to his backswing, and I knew in his backswing it was a strike. It's one of those where I can't really explain it. I turned around because I knew it was a strike, and I was like, yeah. It was just, when you watch people bowl enough, you can see when they're in position pretty early, and he was dead nuts in position, and he flushed it, even though, even though I turned around, I knew it was dead flush, and it was a no doubt. And, it's just one of those things, that they're going to talk about right here, that, he had a friend of his watching him bowl, helping him out by watching bowl TV. It's a real thing. When you watch each other bowl, enough, it's, this does happen. And, and I think this is where a good ball rep can provide positive feedback, but a bad ball rep can do just as much damage as, maybe even more. A bad ball rep, is not going to help you, but if you have someone that knows your game well enough, they can help you out. So we'll watch this.
You don't have a ball rep. You don't have a manufacturer, more or less, that has been helping you throughout this whole process.
I'm going to talk about this a little bit. This is something that kind of happens in forums or social media or whatever. People that really don't know a lot of the environment of professional bowling, where sometimes people are like, oh, they have ball reps, they can get as many balls as they want, and they have all these people helping them, and maybe there shouldn't be coaching. And I tell you what, it's not that's not the case. It's like, yeah, you can get unlimited balls and whatever. It's like, yeah, you can get as much help as you want. Every person that's standing off the lanes, watching you bowl, every single one of them is going to have an opinion. It's up to the player. The player is the one that has to make the final decision. And, whatever that is, you got to commit to that decision, and you got to go out and execute. So this whole thing, that we see about, like all these pros, they have all the helps from, from the ball reps. It's really not that beneficial. It really, really isn't. you know, and yeah, or there are cases where it's like, you know, maybe somebody kind of gets, you know, I don't know. I'm just saying that it's completely overblown. You know, the impact of ball reps. You know, the primary role of a ball rep is to make sure that that player is prepared. You know, as long as you know, as long as you kind of go into that block with a strategy, that's part of the you know, the function of a ball rep is just to make sure the player's prepared. But if that player is conscientious enough, he's already going to do what it takes to get prepared, you know, with or without a ball rep. You know, I remember some of my early encounters with Eric Forkel, and he was meticulous about surface. You know, this is well before resin, and you know, he would have, you know, various balls, you know, with certain pins in certain spots, but he would also have, you know, what surface you know that he had, and it was beyond, you know, at the time it was beyond, oh, I'm sanding this for, you know, for fresh, oh, I'm going to polish this for, you know, for the night block. It was, you know, for Eric, it was well beyond that. It was at a level that no one was really touching at the point. So he was, you know, I wouldn't say he was kind of revolutionary in that sense, but I just remember, you know, he was like, oh, I'm going to hit this one with 500. I'm going to hit this one with, you know, 1,000, hit this one with 2,000, you know. And so I remember talking to him and you know, he was talking about like how prepared, you know, he would get. So again, back to the point of ball reps, you know, they'll talk about this a little bit. You know, the primary role of a ball rep is to make sure that the player is prepared.
But your friend in Florida watched Bull TV and would text you and give you some advice, and you would bounce things off of him. Mm-hmm. You've flown him in, and so now he is here for this show. How good will that feel to have him in your corner?
It's awesome. You know, sometimes in Bull TV, you can't really see everything fully. So him being in person, I think, is a big.
Yeah, that's a good point, you know, by Austin is, you know, many times while you're bowling, you don't really see it, you know, and it's like, yeah, you can see down lane reaction, mid lane reaction, but sometimes if you're really not paying attention, you may not see that the ball's checking off your hand, you know, especially during transition, you know, when you're going from fresh to a little bit of push to like you're kind of in the same lay down area, especially lay down area with other bowlers. Sometimes you don't see the check, you know, and you know, and if you don't recognize that check and you don't compensate for it somehow, you know, you can you know, easily get caught up and just go through the face. You can execute the shot, you know, as far as physically, you can execute the shot, but if you didn't notice the last time you were on that lane where it checked up a little bit on you, you know, because it could have checked a little bit, but still reacted the same way, you know. But just that little subtle check, even if you went light or heavy or just flush, you know, sometimes, you know, that you're just not going to see the ball check a little bit differently. So, you know, anyways, you know, it's nice to have someone behind you, you know, that knows your game, you know, to at least maybe kind of bounce an idea off. He's like, well, you know, I felt like I threw that good, but the ball didn't react the way I thought it would. You know, maybe that's a clue into, you know, into the fronts, you know, starting to go a little bit. But anyways, we'll kind of watch this a little bit and then I'm going to end this.
Oh, all right. Well, and that's Tyler.
Yep.
Tyler is here. Your mom and dad are here?
Yep.
All right. So go out there and see if you can win your first ever PBA Tour title. We'll let you focus on it. It's time for the show. Make sure to tune to CW as we get ready for.
Anyways, I like Rick and Kyle. You know, I think they, you know, I think they're fine. I think they do a good job. You know, I remember back in the 80s when we were watching Wild World of Sports and, you know, ABC and, you know, Bo Burton and Chris Schenkel. You know, when I was young, I had a lot of opinion about those two guys. You know, I wasn't crazy about Chris Schenkel because I just, you know, I was full of myself and I thought I knew everything, and I just wasn't crazy about Chris Schenkel. You know, Bo felt critical, but it just felt like Bo was critical from a almost a jealousy standpoint, because he was basically, while he was doing a lot of those shows, he was supposedly, should be competing with some of those guys, especially in the early 80s. And you watch some of those early 80s shows, and it just kind of felt like there was some professional jealousy that kind of leaked into the show. But anyways, I bring that up, because, we criticize these announcers, and, sometimes people trying to assign blame to, like, well, bowling doesn't get the demographics, the preferred demographic. I think it's like 18 to 35 or something like that. Bowling doesn't get the demographics because of the announcers. Bowling doesn't get the respect because of the announcers. Bowling doesn't get this because of the announcers. That's not the case. So anyways, I'm going to end this, and keep striking.